Okay, good. Well, I'm very pleased to be asked to read your work and to take part in this conversation about creature, stranger, monster, other, or is it creature, monster, stranger, other? The interesting thing is that in this sequence, the hidden term, I think, is self, because we are all creatures, monsters, strangers, and to some extent others too. And the words come loaded with a history of both dread and repulsion, and fascination and attraction. The creaturely, which can be perceived as monstrous, is always ambiguous. And is that chain of words a progression or a prophecy laden with fear? I sense in it a strong current of curiosity filled with desire, which leads the mind of someone reading the title to want to know what these states are rather than feel that they're repulsive. And the stranger is a category with which artists are especially now identified. And by artists, I mean anyone trying to express themselves in a medium to represent or evoke or symbolize the world. And I think that people attempting to do this, generically artists, are identified with the stranger because ever since Rimbaud said, I am another, I is another, je est un autre, we have been trying to think of art as a way of projecting into other states, of escaping the limits of the solipsistic self. Of course, the solipsism will exert its heaviness and its pressure, but in a sense, that imaginative leap that we all try to make when writing or making art is one of actually trying to see what it feels like to be someone else, to be outside. And that someone else need not be a person, it can be a stone or a river. And there's, of course, now also a very important aspect of the stranger, which is the ecological and geopolitical effects of transmigrations and transcultural activities. And I was reminded of a beautiful poem that actually Adrienne Rich wrote a long time ago. She wrote it in the 80s in her prophetically named collection of poems called Atlas of a Difficult World. She begins, memory says, what to do right, don't count on me. And then she lists various atrocities and various acts that are actually good. And one of the acts that are good that memory remembers is I'm a table set with room for the stranger. So hospitality to the stranger is one of the contemporary demands that we feel rightly, that the demand and the pressure of that demand on us. And we also wish, we wish to embrace the possible exclusion that terms like monstrous or stranger imply. We wish to enter that space of exclusion, or at least share in it, with the added difficulty these days that we mustn't feel that we are laying a claim to it or owning it inauthentically. We need to empathize with that position of strangeness, but without pretending or making a false claim to know it. Now, in the works that I read of yours, two strands, and the first is metamorphosis, of leaving the familiar body and traveling inward or outward, of not being bordered and contoured by your familiar shapes. And in myths and religions, in many myths and religions, the interesting thing is that shape-shifting is not simply a loss of self, nor is it disfigurement or degradation. It can be a resource, a potentiality. So the jinn in the nights, for example, who can be both good and bad, I mean, they can bring you blessings or they can bring you dreadful curses, are highly metamorphic. They change their appearances, their size, their identity, their voices, everything. And totem animals in Native American beliefs, like the crow and the jackal and the eagle, are also positive resources. The shamanistic practices also practice that. And heraldic beasts, interestingly enough, in the Western tradition, are also avatars in medieval chivalry. You wear a great bear on your head, or a great eagle on your shield to pretend when you're in a battle that you have the power of these animals. And that connects actually to YY's work. And then these, secondly, and this is a point about writing as a way of making forms, of generating new forms, I felt the importance in all your work of a capacity for mimicry. The language in which you express your different narratives and thoughts and visions as you explore your topics sets out consciously to imitate the shape and motion of the subjects, the syntax and grammar and vocabulary, taking on the rhythms of an octopus's tentacular motion and protective camouflage, or the fragmented and drifting that happens over a night of sleepless fears. So that the octopus is Fiona's work, and the night, the insomnia is yours, Laura's. And more of this when we hear from each of you. And in the case of Hattie's work, there is again a mimicry of the processes of surgery, of the metastases of a disease in the actual language that she's using. So just finally, on the general topic, metamorphosis and mimicry are capacities of sentient beings, but they involve mutations in and out of non-sentient states. A woman turns into a tree to escape rape, in the case of Daphne, and human beings appear after the flood from rocks thrown over their shoulders by Deucalion and Pyrrha. When drawing on metamorphosis and mimicry, language reaches towards animating matter at all levels of creation, and the ecological dangers of the Anthropocene have intensified this growing sensitivity that creatures like us are feeling about matter, however apparently inert, about wounding the body of the world. And finally, because we're now going to hear your voices, what do we hear when the stranger or the monster speaks? How do we listen to that strangeness of speech? And so now I hope I'm going to hear from you exactly that. So the first person to read from her work is Ying, known as YY, Yin Ying Kong, and she will give you the title of her work. And in this case, I was interested that I was interested in the whole thing, but I was very interested that the beast that flickers in the eye, for her excerpt, is both a spectre and possibly real. So the unreality is in tension with the reality, the corporeality of the beast, the presence of the beast. Yet, at the same time, this is a spectral beast. Why?
Hi. So, yes, my final major project is called A Critical Beastery of Singapore. And yes, it's very much about how beasts in all their forms kind of also take on formlessness. Also, they're corporeal and also not corporeal. And it's kind of occurring at the same time. And it's not something that you can pinpoint, which is why I kind of wanted to focus on this idea of flickering, that in the metamorphoses of a beast, you can only see them at moments where they are particularly luminous or distinct. And every other moment, it's kind of beyond grasp. Yeah. And earlier when you mentioned about how we have to embrace and enter and share in the space of the exclusion of the stranger and how that's like a contemporary concern, I was very much kind of reminded of a line by Victor Fagerlund. I'm just going to break out my FMP for a second.
Perhaps you should say who Victor Fagerlund was, just for the audience.
Well, he writes a lot about diversity. So I thought that like something that he said was very kind of relevant to what we're covering. Let me try and find him. Sorry, I'm still trying to find him.
Maybe you can find him later and we can cut it in.
Yeah, I can do that. Anyway, I'll just proceed with the reading then. So, A Critical Bestiary of Singapore is a non-exhaustive bibliographic, artistic, and critical survey of beasts in Singapore, whether real, mythical, or speculative in nature, as well as a survey of alternative forms for or of beasts. It was produced on the occasion of Singapore's bicentennial in 2019, when the nation's history is being dusted off and brought before the public, and the creatures within it woken from their slumber. So I'm just going to read an excerpt, which is actually this is the beginning of my final major project. And the section is called The Beast That Flickers in the Eye. Singapore and bestiary aren't terms often seen together, despite Singapura having derived from the Sanskrit words for lion and city, Simha and Pura, now Singa and Pura in Malay. It may be because the Singapore of today is virtually unrecognizable from the time of its founding. Now fully urban, with meager areas of secondary forest bounded by concrete, it is a far cry from its origins as a tropical jungle surrounded by the straits, with flora and fauna in abundance. The tigers were long ago culled, the birds hunted as game, and the island nearly completely deforested in the mid-19th century. It may be because the beasts on Singapore streets today are not the kind you'd expect of the term beast, being neither large nor powerful, nor unrestrained nor majestic. Instead, they are small, unseen, unnoticed, forgotten. Pigeons, stray cats, insects, die-hard pests of any modern city. It may be because many of Singapore's beasts are imaginary, mythical, or supernatural, sometimes generated as part of marketing campaigns and more often borrowed from the lore of other countries. Singapore is seldom discussed independently from Southeast Asia, as if it doesn't have sufficient history to call its own. A regional melting pot of cultural orphan, take your pick. Or it may be because that the lion that exists in Singapore's name never existed on its lands in the first place. Singapore's Singa is a spectre. Every child in Singapore knows this. Sang Nila Utama saw a lion and named the island Singapura. Every adult in Singapore knows this. The Asiatic lion never roamed in this part. Our founding story is a falsehood, either born of a misidentified animal. The most common theories are tiger, tapir, or mouse deer, or a myth designed to glorify the Malay Rajas. My dad commented, who would want it to be inscribed in history that they were scared of a mouse deer? The veracity of this story has long been in question, exacerbated by the story's delegitimization on national media, where it is often trivialized as dramatic or fantastical, largely, if not wholly, unreal. The Sejarah Melayu or Malay Annals, an obligatory reference for anyone writing about Singapore, for its earliest chapters remain the sole recorded resource of Singapore's founding by Srivijayan Prince Sang Nila Utama, tells of Nila Utama or Sri Buana and his contingent who sought refuge on Kuala Temasek following a storm. And they all beheld a strange animal. It seemed to move with great speed. It had a red body and a black head. Its breast was white. It was strong and active in build, and in size was rather bigger than a he-goat. When it saw the party, it moved away, then disappeared. And Sri Buana inquired of all those who were with him, what beast is that? But no one knew. Then said the monk Lebar Daun, Your Highness, I have heard it said that in ancient times it was a lion that had that appearance. I think that what we saw must have been a lion. The reader of today would know that the creature as described and named by Sang Nila Utama do not match. And so the image of Singapore's principal animal flickers in the eye, from lion to tiger to tapir to mouse deer, even to Jangi, a guardian of gold mines in Minangkabau legends, or Chintay, a geoglyph protecting Myanmar's pagodas and temples. I use flickering because it variously denotes fluctuations in the brightness of an image, such as when the number of frames per second is too small for persistence of vision, or tiny movements, or brief feelings or indications of emotion. These beasts fitfully flare to life at key moments in history through shifts in human consciousness. We may only with concentration catch glimpses of their likeness. The name Singa in itself only sometimes refers to a lion. While it is etymologically rooted in the Sanskrit word for lion, it is used in Sumatra and Java to describe a composite of horse, lizard, water buffalo, serpent, and human. The Thai Simha or Singa, while available as a purebred, is as often hybridized with other animals, including deer, elephant, eagle, and dragon. The Burmese Shinte is likewise part lion and part dog or dragon or human. Among the beasts that Nila Utama Singa figures between, the tiger is probably the most commonly cited. But like Singa, its name is characterized by linguistic indistinctiveness. The Malayan tiger's proper name is harimau, but it is more often referred to as arimau, rimau, or rimau, terms that, according to anthropologist Peter Brungart, are loose enough to encompass the sense of big cat-like animals, such as leopards. As it happens, the Singa in Singapura could have been conjured simply as a metonym for power, not in reference to a physical being. Historically, the name Singapura is not uncommon in Asia. Found in Vietnam, southern Siam, western Java, and India. Though, according to Kwa Heng and Tan, it was less the lion itself than the assertion of the idea of the lion throne that the designation was intended to establish in its nomination of the divine genealogy and historic ancestry. Claude Levi-Strauss likewise observed in his study of totems featuring natural species that animals are chosen not because they are good to eat, but because they are good to think. Because we project onto and through animals metaphors, symbolic codes, and structures which allow us to structure ourselves and our societies. Here, the lion, past the point of flickering, sublimates into things as abstract as human ideals. And that's my excerpt that I was going to read.
Thank you very much. We're now going to hear from Fiona Glen, and she will introduce her piece, which is actually very much about a real animal as opposed to a flickering, spectral beast figure of symbology, but it has immense power, as she's explored, to create symbolic happenings and reverberations.
Thank you. I'm going to read from one of 15 parts of my project, Cephalopodomania, which follows the octopus through contemporary culture, changing into different forms to follow different octopuses. And as it draws inspiration from a trickster animal, the text is playful, colourful, curious, and I find that it hunts and hides, it follows and it leads, and now it wants to reach out to you. It glares venom-eyed from a yellow page. Like a Rorschach test ink blot, it ripples trickily, gathering associations and uncertainties. It is a very good sketch of a very resentful octopus, glowering from seemingly lowered brows. Victor Hugo allowed it to flow with its medium. The animal melts into patches of different opacities, watery shade and thick ink cloud shadow. He has captured the way its twisting limbs almost find right angles in their unpredictable directionality, and into their roving tips he has spun the letter V above the letter H, like an initialed bullet or a death sentence left dripping on the wall. Did he intend to show himself hit-listed by the animal of his nightmares? After all, this is the beast of ash from his 1866 novel, Toilers of the Sea, which grapples the fisherman protagonist from the rocky coastline. Armed with fictional blood-drinking suckers and a combined mouth and anus, Hugo's octopus draws you towards itself and into itself. And bound, stuck, powerless, you slowly feel yourself emptied out within that horrendous sack, that monster. Here, a terror of holes, condensed into one singular orifice, seems to epitomize a comprehensive castration anxiety. Into that footed void, baggy fluid moist, its reaches unseen, an entire man could disappear. Hugo declares this contradictory creature, shapeless but forceful, so ungodly that no mortal could possibly compose it in their imagination. The unknown disposes of marvels, and it makes use of them to compose monsters. Homer and Hesiod only managed to make the chimera. God made the octopus. 60 years before, another Frenchman, Pierre Denis de Montfort, had adamantly argued for the existence of kraken octopuses, which could explain the ancient Nordic legend. His theories were ridiculed and disregarded by the vast majority of his peers, and yet his pen and wash drawings of these massive creatures, with their decisive form and stippled shading, are still popular, available, in fact, on a range of retro homeware and clothing. In Le Poulpe Colossal, the animal's enormous amber and lidless eyes face us brazenly as its arms spiral up the full length of a naval vessel's three masts. De Montfort slowly slipped out of his scientific career and into destitution. He died on the streets of Paris in starvation in 1820. But his drawings continued to propagate imaginaries of living krakens. Perhaps they laid the egg for Hugo's gobbling octopus, and that, in turn, set the standard for the notorious giant squid attack in Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Monstrosity is a culturally agreed category, and together the two novels stoked the cephalomania of the early 1870s, setting bourgeois Northern European dinner tables thrumming with discussion over their malevolent mollusks. A fervour that drew record crowds to Crystal Palace to view the wonderful octopus, or devilfish, on display there in 1871. At that time, recovered carcasses had finally confirmed the existence of giant squid, and commentators were quick to link them to the medieval legend of the kraken. But this was a creature who once had nostrils and jaws, bones and horns. Named the Hafgufa or sea mist in 13th century myth, its great body rolled up from the deep, 1.5 miles across, with a mouth as broad as a sound. A fellow of the Lingbacker, the heather-backed one who imitated islands, the Hafgufa was a great belcher, prone to regurgitating its latest meal as bait for a hungry shoal. Its worst threat was to sink a ship into its downward turbulence. Hafgufa could pull the plug on even the greatest men of war, whether ships or individual heroes. Yet its excrement was said to nurture an army of lesser fish, and so in that steamy wake above its maybe gaping maw, sailors would still dare to fish, gathering their food like scavengers. Olaus Magnus's Carta Marina of 1539 shows smirking fish monsters battling enormous crustaceans across the northern oceans. Nothing so soft-bodied as a cephalopod, and none of those dinner plate eyes. Colossal squid, giant squid. Both these species take their real names from classical Roman and Greek culture, the former from man-made statues so enormous that they created their own category, the latter from those two large beings, the gigantes, earth-sprung challengers of Olympia, born of Gaia, inseminated by the blood of the castrated sky god Uranus. The giants were sometimes imagined with snakes for legs. Animal names with the vivid potentiality of bodies nudging at the edges of their enunciation seem to conjure up apparitions. Octopus. Ancient and borrowed, the word rings in English with a kind of phonetic self-importance, a mythic grandeur. Speak it aloud, its 3 syllables, like 3 hearts, are chambers. The circle of oc is a droplet echoing, the cut clicked, biting down between cupped vowels. After the release of a sucker pot aspirant p, comes the fading slither of s. The animal escapes your mouth. You are left with lips pursed and your tongue tickling at your palate. Assigned sounds fill with shadows that we animate imaginatively. In 1735, Linnaeus, the father of taxonomy. In 1735, Linnaeus, father of taxonomy, listed the kraken as Microcosmos marinus in his Systema Naturae. Marine microcosm, a charmingly awestruck title. But then this is the man who named an entire class Mammalia to encourage women to breastfeed their babies more. His systemic logic was filled with mystery, faith, intentionality. Science is never empty of these. In a time of great passion for classification, for control, inseparable from the ethnological and the colonial, 18th century biologists urgently generated titles for the living and the mineral. Georges Cuvier, a student and reformer of Linnaeus' taxonomy, had named the common octopus Octopus vulgaris by 1797. Apparently, Cuvier was repulsed by a being so slippery, bulging, gripping, wet. I imagine men with starch collars, horrified by an animal with no hard edges to grab onto, no solidity to venerate. Something low, lateral, creeping. Perhaps a creature that Georges Bataille would have been proud of, as he called in 1929 for the celebration of the formless, artworks and other things that rejected formalism's high-minded humanist values, reveling in the messy materiality that for so long had been looked down upon like a spider or a blob of spit, or like a mucus-sheathed spider of the sea, an octopus.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Have you seen one in reality?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Where?
Oh, where? Sorry, cut off there. I went to Greece to find them in their natural habitat. I didn't want to find them in an aquarium. So I spent 5 days sort of snorkeling around after them and trying to get them to interact with me, and they were not interested, shall we say. But yeah, I end my project with a real octopus, which feels right. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So that shows the extraordinary way that there's a slippage between the real and the fantastic. It's very hard to hold an octopus empirically in mind without imagining this huge trail of meanings they bring with them. So now we're going to go to. Are we going to Hattie or to Laura now? Sorry, Hattie. You're going to Hattie?
No.
Or is it Laura? I've got Laura here in my papers. Is that right, Laura?
Let's go with me then.
Yes, good.
I'll go next.
Right. Yeah. So here, with Laura Robertson, we enter the territory of a long tradition of fantasy and horror, with a memoir, part memoir and part investigation of the thrills and pleasures of being afraid, being very afraid. So you can.
That's right. Thank you. Thanks, Marina. This is a book in progress called Alive Asleep, a horror memoir, and it's trying to get to grips with grief, really, through art and culture and horror film, and particular works of contemporary art that I've really been drawn to that seem to say something about grief that I couldn't, especially at the time that I lost my dad about 15 years ago. And in order to get a grip on this grief, whatever form it takes, in the book we traverse sleeplessness as a bit of a territory, so it holds many fragments or textures of horror, and we swoop towards empty spaces, holes, portals, nightscapes, dreamscapes, ghosts, and I've got a particular interest in female artists that I've tried to pin these acute visceral feelings down. Belinda Brookier, Gora Darcia, and Helen Scherfbeck, the Finnish artist, who I'm going to talk about now in this extract, about her painting, The Door. So here we go. One open door, just one open door, and a curious highlight, no, a stress of white fanning the top frame and smeared across the threshold, where the floor meets two stone steps, inexplicably glistening with white hot fire. The black space through and beyond Helen Scherfbeck's The Door isn't actually black, rather a blend of dark green, forest on evergreens with smoky suggestions of a figure, a standing figure with legs slightly apart, watching me, in shadow, or facing the darkness on the other side, having just stepped through moments before, moments ahead of me. I'm at least 12 paces away. I might be looking at one small corner of a vast castle hall or chapel, and can only guess at what's outside the frame. In my eye line, the door is facing me, slightly to my left, as part of a plaster wall, and to my right, an archway breaks out of this wall and connects to a stone pillar. The floor could be cross-hatched, compacted dirt, if only for several slim black brush marks suggesting flagstone cracks, all directed towards the beckoning door. The walls, at first flat grey, gradually expose a palette of cool peaches, china blues, buttery and piss yellows, almost as if the solid boundaries convert into undulating coloured gases if watched carefully. Even the floor starts to pick up these atmospheric hues. Damp with transmutation, the door wreaks havoc with the realm around it. And what is that on the door frame? Red marks? A bloody handprint, perhaps, with a long trickle above it as if the ceiling has leaked lifeblood in a steady drip, 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 following the figure who, seconds before, passed through this space and leaned on the frame to catch his or her breath. Where is that unnatural white hot and orange light coming from? The source is unseen, the refractions impossible, shining out of the doorframe arch and step, creating an unholy portal. There's another witness here with me. A long blare that can't conceivably be mine stretches across the floor from my left diagonally towards the arch and across my path, concealed outside of the canvas and unnoticed until this point. They, whoever they are, must have always been there. Their silhouette is obscure, more of a blemish than a body. Are they benevolent? Their shadow cast maybe from a statue heating up in the waning sun? If so, why does their presence feel so malevolent? They wait, studying the door, studying me, waiting for destruction or salvation, I don't know. I've looked at this for too long, and there's a queue forming behind me of huffing Finnish pensioners. I shift 3 steps away, join the back of the queue, and slowly move towards the door again. It's a very small painting, and certainly not the star of the Athenaeum show, which is double the size of last month's Royal Academy version. Hundreds of visitors have come today to see Scherfbeck's self-portraits. A long line of heads from youth to death, hung chronologically and fading away. The blush of her juvenile face gradually receding into an elderly Nosferatu of angles, pointy ears, smudged nostrils and gaping mouths. The final portraits, made in her 90s, are barely more than hairless skulls. They teeter on the edge of everlasting sleep. They don't comfort or reassure. By contrast, this little frame, decorated with fleur-de-lis, is tucked into a corner amongst studies of seamstresses, young mothers with babes, and her own mother, always in a rocking chair. And the door is an oddity as a consequence, almost abstract in its vision. In this chapel or castle, with its solitary door, the earth becomes something you could swim in. Oils ground into instability, a swamp of dark patches and wetness around the doorstep, the stains indelible, blossoming, and I can't find my footing. Thinking about the origin of the stains, I wonder, what is expected of me here? And through the door, what price to pay for entry in this glistening portal?
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
It's interesting how the portal, that you say the painting is very small. I have, of course, only seen it on a screen, and you don't really get this dimension. It's one of the things that's lost on the internet, is the dimensions of things. But your journey, looking at it, shows 2 things. One, the kind of almost infinite speculations that can grow when something is underspecified. And I think that very often monstrosity is actually trying to correct that by specifying every aspect of the monstrous. So the excrescences, the tentacles, so that at least it can be seized and in that way contained. Because when you can't see it, it can grow and grow and grow. But the other interesting thing about yours, which I think links us to Hattie Gibson's piece, the next one, is that you are going in deeper. And Hattie is interested in these technological systems which actually open up the body, which continue where things might be growing that are meant to grow or not meant to grow. And so there's this idea of going inwards, and the both exhilarating journey and the nightmare journey of penetrating exteriors. So Hattie Gibson now.
Thank you. So I'll be reading from my final major project called Angie. So Angie is a root that relates to vessels and cavities of the body. It's a prefix for growth, a sort of bag, or I saw it as a tuber from which roots could reach out. Angie is a root that's used to describe the growth of a tumour, as in angiogenesis. A tumour being a lump that's most often described as malignant, which means ungodly or alien or monstrous. So it's something that's moving, growing, changing, described to us as unwanted and threatening. With that in mind, I'd like to read a section from my project called Lump, which works through these definitions and etymologies, slipping and breaking from them in its ambiguous form or forms or formlessness. A lump grows her own blood vessels, roots. Rouge tentacles tie onto her environment, curl around her host, as the formation of new receptacles, shells, binding to nearby blood cells through circuits, limbs, outwards. Murky forms slither through these mounds of wet flesh. What images told us this? See those photographic plates that first drew them out through flows of bismuth and oil, injected elements under skin. They latched onto her roots and brought them out beyond borders through rays. A lump does not just survive, she flourishes, with its etymological twists of lexical exchange with its roots in French, which in turn stems from Latin for flower. Mutations become arboreal, with roots multiple, mixed, marvellous, congealed. And mapped with a matched virulence, here come her images, mounted, she is sliced from high above, radiate her parts, gaze at her against the screen, her sprouts and splits are caught, pruned. She is flattened, her parts categorized within margins of machines signaled by words. I travel through her diagrams. These networks, radiant cavities carry my gaze. I am in this machine, this gridded laboratory of somatic tricks. I see her shapes in what look like clouds, through avenues of code, zoom in, zoom out, zoom in further. These movements transcribe her. But she is colossal. In this environment, she lunges forwards with forms rotting, oozing outwards with bulbous grossness, morbid molecules that palpitate and push through this grid, these virtual pores of regimented signs. She bleeds through their margins, grows longer veins, fluorescent blooms with teeth in this moving image that I'm in. She gnaws at them while her potent pulse is multiple and barely legible, battle flesh. Think slimy fluids, fraught compositions, a virus with its roots that mean to flow or to bleed, roots for foul fluids. Like she flows and flows and I'm drowning. I'm forgetting her roots. I don't care for them. These etymologies are deceptive. Because a lump has no origin story. Because she moves as natural and artificial to swell with both, to make something new, something more intangible, diffuse, magnified. There are conifers on Vancouver Island that mutate over time. They've been growing upwards for centuries. From the changing climates that generations have seen, mutations grow. Seed spruces protrude from pods with heretical mutations that connect from its roots with changing fruits above that are blurred beyond needles. These are co-evolving kinships of inside and outside, of earth and space, where boundaries become clouded. Something multi-material, something multi-seed, multi-cloth. Bodies take over and slip and slither through frames, out to the ocean found between borders. We become amorphous of darkened networks where light tries to pant in and out, and in further through our tattered selves. But we are evolved in these vessels and tassels of impurities. Impermeable, we are embodied systematic breakdowns, corporeal excess to seep as we break from cognition. To fall into the body and to fall out of the body, spinning webs in endless flows that reach into and out of molecules. We are congealed cells extending from state to state. We are disruptions in circuits, disruptions in productivity. Water is something you cannot hold, I once read. Beyond the grasp of this mechanical eye, streams of cells breed beyond its control. We wash away the names given to us, names for these organs, limbs, and skin, and the imaging machine with its parts, bits, and cogs.
Thank you very much. Very good. We should clap you all, yes. Good. I wondered, how long did it take you all to get to your themes? I mean, was it a slow process, or did they emerge quite quickly in the process of discussion?
Do you want to start, YY? We can go in the order that we read.
Yeah. The curious thing about my FMP was that I was very certain about the form to begin with, but not the themes. Like, I've been working, I guess, through the past 2 years in the MA writing course on things that were very much to do with taxonomies, with lists. And like, I kind of wanted that to be kind of the prism that I explored. But at some point, there had to be some kind of narrowing down. And in one of our earlier projects with Flat Time House, I wrote a little something about Japanese yokai beasts. So that became kind of the thematic structure. I mean, the thematic kind of thread for me to kind of build into this more localized Singaporean bestiary. Yeah. So I guess there was a lead in from the form for me into the theme.
Well, it's interesting. The essay form in itself has become, much greater interest to writers, and it has these subforms. I mean, these subgenres like the list, the inventory, the bestiary, which you've done, and the mixture of memoir and all these forms. I mean, you've been exploring that. But for the others, did you find that? Maybe we should hear from Hattie, because maybe you didn't say as much as the others.
Oh, well, it actually took me a long time to get to writing this. I mean, I just didn't understand it for years and couldn't really understand the way that these things that, as you say, aren't supposed to be growing inside of us are processed through language, and words like alien and strange, invader obviously didn't really sit well. And I think, something that allows the body or the host to feel very excluded. So, I mean, unlike YY, I had the theme, but I didn't really know how to form it. So, yeah, I mean, my project is very fragmented. I think it's to reflect the way that these parts are mapped.
Yes. No, I thought that was good in all of your work, actually, was this sort of interchange between your topic and the way you were actually approaching it in terms of language and form. I mean, that's very interesting, that mimicry that happened. But the other thing that, I mean, you can take this, each of you can take this question with the other one, which is that you are all from very different backgrounds, and some of you have different languages. And I wondered, this metaphorical map of the monstrous, or the strange, the wonderful, the excluded, the alien, the other, how does that happen transculturally? I mean, did you find that certain imagery and certain ways of thinking were actually in common? They are, as it were, in the human mind in terms of the metaphors. So maybe we should go now to, well, Laura, why don't you take that? Because you're interested in horror too, which possibly is a universal language of some kind. I mean, are we frightened cross-culturally of similar things? I mean,
absolutely. I think really early on in the MA, YY and I bonded over the idea of bedtime ghost. The Chinese idea of bedtime ghost, and then the British old hag syndrome as ways to describe or explain that constricted feeling of sleep paralysis. And it's a culturally rich idea that spans lots of places and centuries as well, and drip feeds into art. I think, like Hattie, I've been trying to write something about this for years. As I said, my dad died from cancer 15 years ago, and it's only really very recently that I found a way to articulate this. And I think perhaps it's helped trying to think of speaking to my dad, or my dad being the reader for this book. He can't possibly talk back, but he's, this idea of him being in the room or being over my shoulder and being a witness and a way to connect with him, because he wasn't involved in the arts and from a working class family in Liverpool. And I think to find a tethering, an anchor, or to reach a hand over through into this metaphorical portal and share visual ideas that we could have both enjoyed and laughed about and had a common, like, mutual appreciation of. I think that was also an important part of finding a way into writing about death and grief. And there's just so much to write about, though, as well, about in terms of the visual representation of death in folklore and culture. I've just been reading your Once Upon a Time book, Marina, and it's just this way of telling stories. It's a way of understanding ourselves and our families and the way we live now, isn't it?
I mean, I think in fairy tales there are cultural specifics. It isn't altogether universal, but I think things like octopuses and krakens, and they come up. They emerge in Japan. They emerge in Iceland. They speak some kind of language of the imagination. Fiona, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I don't know. I think my project was kind of motivated by trying to understand the contradictions between lots of different understandings of the octopus across different cultures. I mean, I focused on Western representations of the octopus just because it's such a huge topic if you start taking it globally. But I feel like often the sort of images of, say, divers being attacked by octopuses from Japan, or some of the prints which were more erotic, yeah, they've been taken in Western culture as meaning potentially something quite different from what they were created to mean, and there's this false reconfirmation that can happen of an existing myth when it seems like another culture is echoing it, when actually the kraken of Nordic legend might not have even resembled an octopus at all, for instance, but because of more recent, I guess, gatherings of different cultural artifacts, it seems to be that they're all linked somehow. I don't know if that makes sense, but I found it quite interesting in the passage that I read, in a part I didn't choose to include, the way that Hollywood has chosen to represent all kinds of different sea creatures, including Cetus of ancient Greek myth, as now a kind of giant squid octopus type thing, when that was never part of its story. And there's kind of this almost desire to create universal monsters that kind of motivates the propagation of these krakens in the present day, it feels.
It's a very good point, that actually. That's a very good point. So the technology of digital communication, film and so forth, has actually tried to homogenize the language. It's interesting because here you have an idea of the monstrous actually as a kind of encyclopedic, globalizing, homogenizing force. And I think that could be correlated with Hattie's feelings about the power of the medical technologies. Again, the body is being, there's almost a consciousness in these technologies that is doing things to us.
Yeah, I definitely think there's some sort of universal I was looking at these forms of access through like this unfettered gaze or like this scientific categorical I, sort of like classifying everything and looking at these medical imaging techniques or origins and going to the pathology museum to kind of work through these objects myself subjectively to try and challenge that view. And to try and rewrite or think of better ways of like working through the monstrous and like what is a monster and who owns that monster if it's taken, where does that monster go if it's taken out of a body or a system of codes, and it's just sort of isolated. And why is that? And just to try and work through those.
I imagine it's just an accident that you're all four of you are female. I imagine the course is not aimed at particularly one gender or another or other gender. But do you think that made a difference to your ways of thinking about these topics? I mean, or perhaps I should say rather, what kind of difference would it make? I mean, one of the things that is characteristic of the Greek tradition, which is after all probably the predominant one for many of us, is that the monsters are frequently, and they're not always, but they're frequently female. And the ones that are most powerful in our post-classical imagination, such as Medusa or Lamia, are definitely female. I mean, some of the masculine monsters, like the I'm struck. There's sort of the Nemean lion. In some of Hercules' labors, he kills various male monsters. But on the whole, they've faded from view compared to Chimera, who's female, Scylla, who's female, Medusa, and so forth. And I wondered if there's a sort of reckoning there, what an underlying motive of your attraction is, that there's a reckoning there to be made with this language.
I definitely agree with that. I think, I know in Welsh mythology it's quite similar. Like women tend to be turned into animals for kind of deviating from their fate. And Welsh is called Mabinogion, which translates as stories for sons. What you just said obviously really reminded me of that.
But some of the Mabinogion heroines are fantastic.
Yes, I'm particularly thinking of Blodeuwedd, who was made out of plants specifically to be somebody's wife, but she falls in love with someone else, and so she's turned into an owl. And that's usually how the stories go.
Yes, the owl is accursed.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so I think definitely. For me, when I'm talking about the scientific eye, it's predominantly a male eye, and so reworking these objects through my own experience was very important.
Well, I think medical discourse for a long time, certainly since the Enlightenment, has been very associated with perhaps not the male as a person, but with the idea of the authority, the actual, what people call the sort of name of the father, the law, the phallic, the phallogocentric law, which maybe individual men are not responsible for, but
yeah.
Why do you want to say something about this? Because you probably have. I'm sure you know the classical tradition, but I just wondered if you have also inherited the Chinese tradition, or the Malaysian tradition, or the Singaporean tradition.
as it happens, the Singaporean tradition is probably kind of quite broadly a Southeast Asian tradition. We are kind of melting pot. I do get a sense about like the gendered aspect of like beast and how it's associated with females here. There was like quite recently an artist called Zarina Muhammad who was talking about exercising a fibroid from within her body, and I feel like there's some kind of like inhabitation of the beast within the female body that is like more a point of discussion here than within a kind of a male body. I don't really I haven't really encountered much discussion with the male body. I mean, broadly, it's almost like, I mean, there are, for example, traditions of like old people, old men in Malaysia becoming werewolves or like were-tigers, and I think that's kind of the only specifically gendered story of creatures that I've heard of in that sense in this area.
Why did they get turned into were-tigers? What have they done to deserve that?
Actually, it's not considered a bad thing. It's like they re-assimilated back into their natural kind of environment. So they would, I mean, in some cases it's that it's malevolent. In some cases it's malevolent, and like the were-tigers do come and like steal people away in the night or something. Example, when they reach the end of their life, they just naturally become this were-tiger. And
I quite fancy this fate.
You could wreak havoc on everyone around you who'd insulted you. My internet connection's gone a bit, everyone.
Oh, really?
Can we just... Okay. Some of you have stopped.
Oh.
Okay, everyone's back now. Sorry. Carry on.
You were clear from my... Okay, cool.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I think that gender and sex and sexuality and ethnicity and all of the different categories of identity or other people came into my project hugely. And definitely I find it really interesting to see often like hugely divergently gendered depictions of octopuses, but when representing women or queer people, this sort of almost like assumed obviousness, an obvious connection between that sort of, I don't know, flexible, soft body and the octopus. And I've got a section all about Ursula from The Little Mermaid and how she's represented as this shape-shifting, kind of subversive, drag inspired character through this sort of inky, mobile creature that kind of lives alone and does what it is. So definitely I think I was personally attracted to people or figures who could be seen as other in octopuses, kind of wanted to understand that and try and explore the really generative and positive ways that can be done, but also the ways in which octopuses have been used to other people and groups of people. And definitely there's, I think, a bit of a kind of cephalofeminism to be done in terms of like relating to these animals and not allowing them to be pushed out and seen as alien, and kind of because of their slipperiness and their mucusy way of being and their ability to change, that shouldn't be seen as alien but just another earthly way of being. And kind of having that relationship with them, no matter what body you have, can kind of, I don't know, be kind of a feminist thing to do.
Yes, and artists are doing that. That's what, I mean, Laura's artists are, in a way, very involved with that transvaluing the inherited categories of what is vile or low or base. I mean, I think artists have been, involved in that for a while. I mean, someone like Louise Bourgeois is very involved in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, spiders were her totem animal.
Yeah.
But again, there's ambiguity. I mean, she both loves and hates her spider mama. But Ursula stole the show of the Little Mermaid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if she's meant to be kind of repulsive, she's so much more charismatic than Ariel, I think.
Yeah, and there's a lot of love for her in the way that she's drawn and portrayed and written. It's a kind of, I don't know, it feels like her creators were reveling in that as well. And the Divine, the drag star who kind of inspired her, was sort of quite loved by the creators who made Ursula. So while she's the villain, she's definitely far more interesting and memorable than the heroes, who are very conventional. So yeah.
Yes. I didn't know Divine had been the model. That's interesting. Good.
I think there's something as well about writing about the female body that's uncomfortable or stereotyped or cliche that you're very aware of as a female writer, right? Especially like, you know, I've deliberately called mine a memoir, a horror memoir. I've still called it a memoir, and that's quite deliberate, because I'm trying to claim my memoir and claim a space in a way. But I was struck in your Rachel Kneebone essay that you're going to read later, Marina, that line, "We are not very reliably at home in the world we interpret," and that that felt very familiar. I write about the body undergoing the physical kind of symptoms of anxiety and depression in the book, and it's a very uncomfortable, strange, monstrous, otherworldly place to inhabit, because one, you feel sometimes very self-indulgent and inward looking, and in another way you can't possibly communicate what you feel because it's very subjective, and then confusingly you realise how universal it is because everybody's felt like this at some point. The constriction of grief, the the walking through a door and not feeling the same anymore, being utterly changed by experience. These are all things that we can really relate to. So,
but your relationship with your father is rather exceptional, because he liked showing you, he liked doing horror movies with you. This is very unusual.
Yeah, he let me watch horror movies when I was really young. Oh, absolutely outrageous. But it's just, I suppose there's that sick fascination, isn't there, in works of art that we all love as well. Like, we all love to look at something that's, a Goya painting, or, Belinda Brookia's sculptures are really, really, truly horrible in lots of different ways. They feature amputees and broken limbs and skin, and real animal skin. So they're not entirely pleasant to look at, but they do definitely speak of something darker that we can instantly recognise, from the crucifixion of Christ to horses killed on the battlefield in World War One. There's lots of references there that you can immediately get, and it's that kind of immediate bodily feeling that you also feel when you look at works of art like that are important. And that's the kind of transformative thing that we talk about when we talk about why we love art. That's what we're always searching for, isn't it? That gut punch.
Yeah. Aristotle, in the very first chapter of the Poetics, says exactly that. He says the strange thing is about the human mind is that things that would repel us and we would loathe to see in real life, such as dead bodies, insects, are in art objects of beauty.
Mm.
Yes, and that's a paradox. I mean, he's about to talk about tragedy, about how tragedy is a form that, while it shows these appalling things and takes us into abysses of torment, somehow delivers us satisfaction and gratification and pleasure.
Which is almost what horror does as well. Could you say as well that, like, they're not the same, but that a tragic kind of display of dismay and suffering kind of relates to the way that people take pleasure in watching horror films today.
Also, making art out of these things is the transform. I mean, that's metamorphosis too. It's not. I mean, they might the feelings and the truthfulness is there, but they remain there. But the act representation is transformative in some deep way, which is very difficult to understand. But maybe now I could read actually from the story that I begin the Rachel Nieburn essay with, because it's about this. It's about the destruction that then leads to the representations of art, to the artifact. And it doesn't explain it at all because it's a myth, but it's a very interesting myth, which in a way, is just to be handed over to you or anyone for thinking about, because it's not like animals are good to think with. Myths are good to think with. And this one is a very strange and deep one, I think. And I used it rather literally in a sense at the beginning of my essay about Rachel Nieburn. Rachel Nieburn is a wonderful sculptor who mostly works in porcelain. She's made porcelain her kind of absolute personal medium, and she's very technically inventive and adventurous with it on very large-scale pieces, which is very unusual in porcelain. But the forms of her work are cracked. She likes letting the material take allow its own collapse in the kiln and so forth. These are bodies which are in a state of destruction or cracking or flaying or decomposition. So I was reminded of this story, which is a Celtic myth. I don't know if there's a companion of it in Welsh mythology. There might be. Anyway, it's about Aoife, who's one of the great female figures. So I'll start reading. I should just say before I start reading that Rachel Nieburn is going to have a big show in Finland, but it's been postponed because of the virus till 2022. And I wrote this for the catalogue. After Aoife, the wife of Manannán mac Lir, the son of the sea, steals the secret knowledge of writing from him, he changes her into a crane, a bird who prints letters on the sand where she treads, and when she flies, makes a kind of skywriting which can be read, and was read, as auguries. At least that is one version of the story. Another says the jealous rival for the love of Manannán's son turned Aoife into the bird. Both versions agree that after a long while, 200 years, Manannán flays his wife, and from her skin makes a bag in which he hides all his treasures, including the secrets of language. Some say it was written in runes. The bag's contents can only be seen when the sea was full. Then all the treasures were visible in it. When the fierce sea ebbed, the crane bag was empty. James Joyce catches the legend's sense of the sea's wonderful strangeness when he describes Manannán speaking with a voice of waves, while about his head writhe eels and elvers. He's encrusted with weeds and shells. His right hand holds a bicycle pump. His left hand grasps a huge crayfish by its two talons. Joyce's Son of the Sea is a Medusa who resists despair. More recently, and in a more serious vein, Seamus Heaney picked up the image of the crane bag to reflect on the struggles of the imagination. For Heaney, it's made of exactly the kind of fibre from which the trawl net of the mind is to be woven. Aoife's skin offers a poet a metaphor for his art, an art of words. But it also gives us, I think, a symbol for the arts of making, as in Rachel Nieburn's sculpture. It places a metamorphosed woman at the heart of a story about cultural knowledge and casts her savagely destroyed body as its keeper. It imagines her change into a form that is not form, a hide, an eviscerated body, a pelt, a collapsed thing which changes shape and weight according to what it holds, and only reveals its interior secrets through the flux of time embodied in the tides. Significantly, the Irish myth expresses the thirst for knowledge and its preservation in terms of an object that is labile and symbiotic with the fluid element of water. It resembles the skins of sulkies or the feather cloaks of fairies in the 1001 Nights, which they need to return to the element from which they come. The search for a visual language to convey this mythic quest for the revivification of the body, for an understanding of hidden systems of meaning, for a living connection to the elements, catalyzes the adventures in aesthetic form which Rachel Meeburn has been pursuing as she communicates the experience of organic being through her precise, rapturous visions in pencil and porcelain. Thank you.
I really love that idea of the trawl net of the mind, you know, skin as a metaphor for art and a symbol for the arts of making. I really enjoy that idea, like the idea of it physically in terms of like the skin or of slip and the way porcelain bakes and the gloss and all of that. But all of the sorry, go on.
Well, since I read this, actually, Cabinet magazine, which I know you're aware of because Brian Dillon was your teacher, it has just published an essay called The Non-Boundary by Justin E. Smith, and it's about skin and how skin is a net. I think you'd all be fascinated by it. Actually, it's online. You know, Cabinet is now online.
Gonna bookmark that.
Yeah. Speaking of skin, I think I was exploring this idea of reincarnation when I was looking at beasts, how humans can become beasts in their next life, and that we might have been beasts before. And there's this amusement park that's quite strange in Singapore called Haw Par Villa, where they display the 10 courts of hell in Buddhist Taoist belief. And in the final court, in the 10th court of hell, you are assigned a skin based on your moral caliber. So if your moral caliber is lower than what a human should be, you'll be assigned a skin of a rabbit or a hare, different kinds of small animals or big animals, depending. And it always kind of intrigued me to think that the human form fitting into a beast skin, no matter how small or big, would be kind of a strange experience. You'd be distending it in really strange ways. So it's containment, but it's also kind of bizarre, that your current form doesn't kind of last your soul or something. I'm not really sure where I'm going with this, but yeah, the idea of skin was just really bizarre to me, that maybe at our cores we're all the same, but the skin is kind of what makes us consider something strange or other or monster or creature.
You really reminded me of that horrible scene in Men in Black when the alien squeezes his cockroach body into a human farmer's body, and it's all the angles and joints are wrong, and the skin looks like it's gonna break, and his face is all distorted. Brilliant.
Yeah, it's almost like an opposite horror, right? Like the idea of something, the idea of being squashed into smaller skin or space than you can survive in, versus the Aoife horror of yourself being scooped out and replaced with other objects, but the skin, which kind of is almost like an identity kind of remaining distorted in a different way. There's something really sinister about both of those kind of opposite ways of skin being kind of half still you, but not at all.
It's a medium too, because it's only visible, everything's only visible when the sea washes over it. It's so mysterious, but it's somehow beautiful. I'd love to see it drawn or made into an animation.
That'd be beautiful.
Yeah.
It's like the octopus skin as well, isn't it? Like how it changes colour to match its surroundings, how skilled it is at camouflage, and then is colourblind. I learned from your text. How bizarre. I was thinking about that for ages, how it would know, that kind of bodily instinct that it would know. It just does it automatically and blends back. Such a beautiful idea.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of beyond understanding right now, I think, for people who are studying octopuses, how it's possible for them to be colorblind and yet have such acute demonstrations of not only they can camouflage kind of extremely well and convincingly, but they can also use color for signaling, and there's loads of different displays that they make that people don't yet understand what they're doing. And there's also the kind of really fascinating thing that they might be communicating almost without desire to through their skin, that it might be a subconscious communication happening all the time. So a lot of artists and writers working with octopuses are really interested in how they might be communicating dreams or subconscious kind of undesired messages on their skin as well. And there's a huge connection as well with how changing this skin can be a metaphor for queer self-representation and sort of changing to different scenarios without losing that essence of who you are at the core, kind of metamorphosing at will. But yeah, the octopus skin is like, I feel in more contemporary understandings of it, one of the biggest aspects of what draws people to it is this kind of fascinating animal. Yeah, it's...
Do they lay eggs? How do they reproduce?
Octopuses? They lay eggs. Yeah, so they the female tends the eggs for a series of many, many weeks without eating or resting at all, and then dies as soon as they hatch. And only about I can't remember the exact figure, but only about 1 in a million octopuses will actually survive to adulthood from that batch of eggs.
Oh.
Yeah. So it's really interesting because when people sort of relate them to like motherhood and wombs, and it's kind of crazy because their version of motherhood is this kind of horrifying thing for us to understand or think about, this idea of losing the vast majority of your children and your life as just a consequence of reproducing.
Have you seen the films of Jean Pain-Levé?
Yeah.
They're extraordinary, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
Going back to skin and the octopus changing color, and bodily borders sort of changing, but the skin sort of like remaining. Kind of reminds me of like collapsing hierarchies of inner and outer, and kind of feeds into that narrative like of it being threatening or something you can't really understand or fix or catch. So it's sort of like it's always changing. Where was I going with this? Somewhere. Yeah, it sort of goes against like sort of like states of observation or surveillance where things are like caught in stasis and entirely understood. If something's always moving, then it's easy to call that monstrous or strange.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. I think the fact that an octopus is kind of hyper-elastic and pretty much can turn its body into any form while having a sort of form that we recognise as the silhouette of an octopus is something that you can, and I don't know, I see as something really exciting and sort of thrilling just on like a metaphorical or like a biological level. It's incredible. But definitely that sense that there's no dimension by which you can measure it. You can't identify very easily one octopus from another by their dimensions because they're always shifting. It's kind of this total lack of control has prompted quite a lot of horror, in the same way that, Laura, some of your ghosts and just kind of spectres, the thing which is unsettling about them is the idea that they cannot be measured or gripped. And it's kind of, I was thinking about like, all of our projects, I think, have this interest in either technologies which do a grip and grasp and kind of hold on to knowledge or the body, or an interest in trying to do that gripping and grasping and holding on to something which is slipping away or ephemeral. And yeah, like what that does when it sort of, is there something horrifying about things that cannot be gripped, and at what point is that lack of grippability a good thing and kind of a generative quality that we should be, I don't know, looking at in a way that is less, has less of a desire to categorize and contain it.
And I think one of the things that has definitely been changing, whether it's because of technologies or whether technologies have produced this, is that Euclidean geometry, the geometry of right angles and forms that are not metamorphic, it has given way to. I mean, Donna Haraway. I'm sure you read the Donna Haraway recent Tentacular manifesto, which that idea of the sprawling, the net, rather than. I mean, I've written a lot about the arabesque as a sort of getting away from the orthogonal line, the right angle or the straight line, into indirection and networks and systems of that kind. I think all that is leading to, what we were talking about before, the transvaluing of different states of matter. So the gelid or the slimy, the viscous. I think that's one of your fellows or tutors as well, has written on the viscous. The slippery. These things are all changing in aesthetic value and also simply physical responsiveness. Our feelings about them are changing, are different. I mean, there used to be a tremendous clash between Chinese cuisine with its slipperiness and sliminess and the cultivation of those kinds of textures and Western cuisine. And now that really is changing because we've been very, for a long time now, Chinese cuisine has been very, very well known and very loved in places where it didn't originate. And so that sea cucumbers are no longer abhorrent. We understand them. But we have to stop eating octopus. As what you said horrified me because I've seen so many octopus on sale. I mean, hundreds of them actually sometimes in Italy or Greece.
In Korea, they actually slice up the octopuses when they're still living, and then they serve it to you on a platter with like sesame oil and soy sauce, and it's still wriggling. And you eat it while it's wriggling. It's quite a unique experience.
Maybe we should end there. The true experience of the monstrous.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just thinking what's interesting for me is that this mutability and this kind of metamorphoses of the beast actually kind of shows up in the writing. I know, like, from Fiona's text especially, there's a lot of sibilance and alliteration, and it's almost like this undulation of sounds. And that is like the creature is like occupying space on your page, and it's kind of like flowing through these different sound devices on the page. And I sort of see that as like the creature, I don't want to use the word colonizing, but it's like it's
populating.
Yeah, it's like populating your page, like not necessarily in a conscious way. I don't know if that was like part of the process, kind of letting the beast take over on the writing, kind of intruding. And I was also thinking somehow the beast lends itself very well to sound devices. So we have the lexicon and the vernacular, and it's always got a certain kind of sound or like syllabic quality to it. And I was thinking about how sound is something that like you can't control its intrusion. When a sound arrives at you, there's no way to kind of block it out. It kind of occupies space, and that's kind of what the beast is doing on the page as well. Yeah.
I think that we should have a last comment from each of you. So, which one who would like to go next? Hattie, why don't you round up?
Round up.
Sum up. Well, what are you hoping to do with it? Perhaps you could all just say what you're hoping will happen to your texts.
For me, keep writing and to keep growing, and yeah, just the text just to keep. Sorry, let me start again. For the text to keep growing and to see where it goes. I feel like I have. I do understand it a lot more and understand perhaps why certain words are being used to describe certain parts of the body or like forms of excess. And I think through my final major project and reading everyone else's works on the monstrous, I'm beginning to understand where it can be better and new places where it can grow. And to sort of, kind of, yeah, I mean, I'm beginning to reclaim those parts as my own now.
Good, very good. Okay, Laura?
I'm continuing to write my book. I'd like to write sections of it that are far more terrifying and far more funny. I think I enjoy to read myself as a reader. I like those contrasts. So I'm going to continue to work on it. And I was just thinking of the E.F. Benson quote, "One forgets all else if one is afraid." I think I enjoy the escapism of horror. I'm going to continue to enjoy that through the writing, I think, and see where it goes.
Laura?
I'm still very much kind of like enamored with the more formal aspects of it, more than the theme. And like I recently got to see this video by Sally O'Reilly, and it's called Reroute Your Writing. She talks about how when her writing becomes tame and samey, and she needs fresh forms and unpredictable gestures, she consults the animals. So I was thinking about how I want my writing to almost take on the temperament, the personality of the animal, and see how I can like kind of deconstruct that process. Yeah, so it's very much about form for me. Yeah, and that's I guess the thread of exploration that I'm gonna just follow.
Fiona, you can have your last tentacular words.
Well, I very much want my project to kind of be unleashed into the world and to live and go out and be read, because it's still growing, and it feels really good to have completed it for now for the purpose of the MA, but now to be able to just let it grow, because the process was a lot like trying to stuff an actual octopus into a box and it resisting. It wanted to be longer, it wanted to reach out and grab new octopuses. So there's lots of things that I'm still excited to write about, but also I want to make it visually even more, because it uses colour as a device throughout to kind of transform through different states, but I want it to also have a lot of visual play and sort of iridescent or transparent sections and different games people can play, and for it to feel like visually as well as textually it's doing that play and transformation. So I think, I'm quite happy that while I feel really content with how it is right now, I'm also just excited to keep working on it and keep following octopuses.
Thank you. We should clap each other.
Well, we should thank Dame Marina Warner for being a fabulous chair. Thank you so much for your time and for your generosity and for that fabulous introduction. It's been such a pleasure, and I think we're all going to come to Finland with you to see Rachel Kneebone's exhibition on a group trip, I think.
That's what you must do, definitely.
That'd be brilliant. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you very much.